Okay, this should be an absolute banger. Um, this almost makes me want to get into doing some economic videos because I mostly just do league stuff, but I had to get into this because I watched this video the other day actually, and I pretty much forgot about it, but I disagreed with just about everything everybody said in the comments, and I don't understand how I can watch a 30-second video and look at the comments and have such a different opinion than everybody. Like, just disagree with everybody on the league stuff, on the economic stuff, just everything is a mess. So, this is going to be a very different and interesting video because it's going to be partly economics and it's going to be partly related to League of Legends and NA as a region and all this stuff. And yeah, so let's get into it. But basically, I'm pretty pissed. I forgot about it, like I said, but then I saw somebody replied to what I said, so I left a quick comment or something like that. And it wasn't even about the main things I disagreed with. I think it was about like advertising in NA versus advertising in the LEC. And we'll get into that. But the comment was so wrong on so many levels and went off on some economic stuff that really had nothing to do with the league stuff I was talking about, that I just have to get into it because it's right up my alley with league and economics. So I mean, it's a pretty simple video. I actually thought it was a different one, but it's just 30 seconds. And I don't think it was an intentional dig at NA or anything like that. But the person asking the question was basically saying G2 and RNG both went undefeated to get into the Rumble stage. And so if you don't know how that works, let me pull this up because we're going to have to pull this up anyways. MSI is going on right now, the 2022 MSI, and they had this group stage first with the wildcard teams and stuff like that. And a lot of the major regions, all of the major regions have to play through this to get into the Rumble stage. So, they have these different groups or whatever, and all of the major regions, with the exception of NA, won every single game. However, the reason why NA didn't win every single game is because they were the only team who had to play in a group versus another major region. So you could imagine that since NA was 4-0 versus the wildcard team that they played, which was all 4 games versus Oceania, that it's totally possible that NA would have been 6-0 if they were in the group that T1 is in, or in the group that RNG is in. Now, do I think that's realistic? Probably not. To be honest, I think that if NA was in Group A or Group B, they'd probably lose one game. I would expect them to lose one game. But I think it's totally possible that they would go 6-0. So with that context in mind, basically she's saying G2 and RNG both went undefeated in their run to the Rumble stage. Let's see what they say.
EU needs to sign.
Do you believe any of them will pose a threat to T1? Or is there another team? Is there a team you're looking out for? Right? So she's just asking him like who they're worried about in the tournament. Here are the teams that went undefeated so far. Blah, blah, blah. And he said, probably without even thinking about it, that's why they're called major regions, because the minor regions are pretty bad, and they lose to the major regions. And basically, and this could even be a mistranslation, but all that he said was it's very interesting to see that all the major regions team make it to the Rumble stage undefeated. And maybe there's a little bit of copium, but actually, including NA, all of the major region teams made it to the Rumble stage undefeated against wildcard teams. Now, again, there is one team that didn't make it to the Rumble stage undefeated, which was NA, but that's because they were in a group with another major region. And who's to say that if T1 was in this group with G2, if they wouldn't have dropped one game out of 4 to G2 and not been undefeated? Or if RNG was in the group with G2, if they wouldn't have dropped a game to G2 and not been undefeated? Now, NA did lose all 4 games to G2, so that's pretty clear that G2 is a much stronger team than EG is, and that makes NA look a little bit, weak right now, and that's true. That is what it is, and I think that NA probably is the weakest of the major regions right now. But they still went undefeated versus all the wildcard teams, and have done pretty well, which we'll get into in some of the different stages at MSI. Honestly, even at Worlds, which I think a lot of people forget about, and I think they forget about MSI too, but we'll get into that. So when we get into the comments, people are saying that like NA is a wild card region and stuff like that, and they're not joking. Like, some of them are serious, even though, again, NA didn't lose a single game to a wild card team. So he just said it's very interesting to see that all the major regions teams make it into the Rumble stage undefeated, which kind of implies that because NA wasn't undefeated, that they're not a major region team. But again, none of the major region, and this may be what he meant, there's also a translation diff involved, so it's totally possible that he just means that they all made it to the Rumble stage without losing a single game to the wildcard teams, and that there's still a big gap there between the major region teams and the wildcard teams. And then he says, but to be honest, I don't think that any of the major region teams, any of those teams will pose a threat to T1, which is the favorite in the tournament, right? That's fine. So, I mean, that's it. And then he's just rewatching some of it. So it's like nothing. I mean, not even Riot considers NA a major region. According to Riot, the 3 major regions at MSI are LCK, LPL, and LEC. And I can only assume that because I don't really understand why they said this, I can only assume that the reason why they said this was because, because NA is in a group with G2, whereas normally every major region is in their own group. However, this isn't anything particularly against NA. This is just because they only have 3 groups, and unfortunately for the format, it's a little bit scuffed. One of the groups has to be different than the other 2 groups because of the number of teams and the number of regions that they have participating. And so unless you were going to split these up into 4 different groups, you were always going to have to do it like this. So they could have done it, they could have done a different format for sure, but I don't think that Riot did this because they think NA is a wildcard region. This is just the format that they had because of the number of teams and the way that they've done 3 groups. So that's like obviously just wrong. Sad thing is NA is the worst region, yet their players all make 6 figures a year playing for nothing. Korea, EU, and China should get paid double the amount because they practice and play twice as hard. I mean, NA is not the worst region. I would agree that they're the worst major region. He's saying it's sad that the players all make 6 figures a year. Not all the players make 6 figures a year. The star players do, and some make more than that. Some make 7 figures. But I believe that the minimum salary in the LCS is like $40,000 or $50,000 a year. And believe me, there's actually plenty of teams that are working on a low budget in NA and trying to actually be profitable or run a budget team and keep their spot. And there's a lot of newer, younger players and things like that, or rookie players or whatever, who are not getting paid 6 figures. So that's wrong. Korea, EU, and China should get paid double the amount. Well, the amount that you get paid doesn't have to do with how hard you practice or play or necessarily even how good you are at the game, right? Because the amount that you get paid is going to be determined by what teams are willing to pay you, right? Like if you could go to one team and then they'd pay you more than another team, then that competition creates a demand for the players, and there's a limited supply of players of that caliber, and that determines how much they're going to get paid. Whether a team is able to pay that or not, whether they're able to pay that equilibrium wage, is going to be determined by how much money the teams are bringing in from advertising, sponsorship deals, and things like that. And in NA, as I'll get into here, NA has a lot of big companies, and it's a really easy market to advertise in because it's a very large market with a lot of people who all speak the same language and who all have a lot of income. And the problem with doing that in Europe, for example, is that in Europe, they speak many different languages. So if a French company tries to get a sponsorship deal for an LEC team, they're going to have to pay this premium to advertise to all of Europe when they don't want to be advertising to all of Europe. They just want to be advertising to a French market. And so that creates a difficulty within the LEC of we can only really bring in companies to sponsor and advertise who want to be able to advertise to all of Europe. And that's very difficult. And then even if you do that, right, they have to advertise to all of Europe when Europe speaks multiple different languages, which is very hard because if they come up with an advertisement or if a sponsor wants to write something on something, how can you do that in a language that will get across to everyone in Europe? It's literally impossible, but you pick a language and you do your best. Maybe you pick something like English so that the maximum number of people will understand it, and you go with it. And so it's very, very difficult, right? Same thing with Korea. Korea has a much smaller market than Europe and North America. They do speak a unified language. And to be fair, some of the players in Europe, Korea, and China actually get paid a ton of money. So I'm not actually entirely sure that it's even true that like the average player in NA makes way more money than the average player in Europe, because there's plenty of players in Europe and China and Korea that are getting paid a ton of money. In fact, China was well known for buying Korean players at exorbitant amounts of money. And so I'm not actually sure that that NA players are ultimately getting paid way more. Now, I would say that it probably is the case that they're being paid more in some cases, because definitely players have left EU to come to NA, and probably they would only do that if they're getting paid more money. So, and then this is a good response, right? Not everything is about skill. Salary is about business, right? This is a good response. Sums up what I said, except much shorter. Yeah, but NA also imports washed up shitters instead of actually raising young talent like China, Korea, and EU does. So NA coaching / management has no one to blame but themselves. I personally blame team owners entirely. I mean, this is a little bit flawed, but it's fine. This guy said, there's not nearly as many league players in NA as other regions. LoL is not nearly as popular in NA as it is in China, Korea, or Europe, so they have to rely on imports because there's not enough talent in the region. Not because NA players are naturally worse at the game than in other regions, but because there's way less players, which inherently means there will be less pro-level players. And this is true. And you can look this up on sites like op.gg. You could do it right now. You go to op.gg and you go to the leaderboards here for NA, and it tells you the number of players that have completed their 10 ranked placement matches. So there's only 1,400,000 players, and we're about halfway through the year, who have completed their ranked placement matches. And I will tell you from personal experience that just a few years ago, this number was well over 2 million. And to make matters worse, right, not all of these players, not all of these accounts are unique accounts. I personally probably have like 7 accounts that have completed placements. So when you think about the fact that probably half of these are not unique players that have completed their placements, but a lot of veteran players who have multiple accounts, we could only be working with 750,000 players who have completed their 10 placement matches. And that's just completing your 10 placement matches, right? How many people out of this 750,000 that are actual people instead of duplicate accounts, how many of these people do you think are actually playing at least one game a day in ranked? Not very many. And even one game a day is not even close to how much you would need to play in order to get to a high level. So we just don't have the players in North America compared to other regions. You look at other regions, and League is so popular in Korea that even though the country and the region is much smaller, and keep in mind, NA is not just America. NA is America, and we've also got Canada, and a lot of players in Mexico and Latin America play on NA too. So we've got multiple countries coming in. I suppose Korea does too. A lot of Chinese players play on Korea, but it's harder to get an account there. So let's see if we can switch to Korea here and then look at their leaderboard. So this is the leaderboard for Korea, and in NA we had 1,400,000. In Korea they have 3,367,000. China, I don't even think we can look at on here because China's kind of complicated. I'm not even entirely sure how their servers work, but I think they've got like over 30 different League of Legends servers in China. And they've got a massive player base over there in China. But that basically tells you all you need to know. If there's double the number of people playing in Korea as they're playing in NA, and actually more than that, there's more than double the number of people playing ranked in Korea as playing in NA. Obviously, at the top of the Korean solo queue ladder, there's going to be at least double the number of competitive players at the top, which push each other to get better. And so they just have a much more competitive environment, which is going to produce a lot more top quality players. So when you just take into account the fact that Korean teams are a little bit better than Western teams, right, than NA teams, and they have well over double the player base, an extremely competitive pool at the top who's pushing each other up, and NA professional players who live in California have to play on 60 ping, right? And a lot of people who live around the US and Canada have to play on 60 ping or more. Whereas in Korea, the country is so small around the centrally located server that everyone can play on 8 ping. That's a massive difference. I don't know how much of me getting better at League was due to the ping, but while I was here in Michigan, my ping was around 24, and when I was in Seattle, my ping was like 63 after the server moved to Chicago. Before that, it was actually lower, so maybe that's a good argument. It's not like I was Challenger back when my ping was 20 in Seattle, and I do think I made a lot of real improvements as a player other than that. But ping certainly played a factor in me being able to get better at my timing. I mean, one of the main noticeable things that I said that helped me get to Masters was that I got better at using my abilities at the right time to block other abilities in the game. Well, if your ping's a lot better and you can do those things faster, that makes that improvement that I made easier, because the timing's easier to do. You can react better than if you were on 60 ping. So when you just take into account that Korea's got well over double the number of players and that their ping is consistently 8 no matter where they are in the country, whereas in NA, professional players are practicing on 60 ping, and then they're scrimming on the tournament realm on 8 ping, and then they're trying to play their professional matches on 8 ping. So if you play a bunch of your games on 60 ping, and then all of a sudden you have to play at 8 ping, you travel, across the world to a tournament, and all of a sudden you're playing on at this MSI random 30 ping, which feels like 70 ping. Then they're fixing it so it's 30 ping again. You know, it's a mess. It's really a mess. And I think just the ping and the number of players alone is going to be a huge impact on why NA teams are worse than other teams, even compared to Europe. And we can see Europe has two servers. They have Europe West, which is the main one, and they have Europe Nordic East. So we can see if we can see that. So in Europe West, right, there's 3 million people, barely less than Korea, you know, and you have a lot of people, well, not that many, I won't say that. You do have a lot of people traveling to Korea, but let's be honest, like, those are mostly streamers and professional players. There's very few of these people. We're not talking about, there probably aren't even 1,000 players. There probably aren't even hundreds of players traveling to Korea to play, let's be honest. So forget about that point. But, you know, they're a very small difference. So there's a ton of players on, and that's just on Europe West. You also have Europe Nordic East, which is also competing and going into LEC and contributing there as well. So you've got a complete difference. You know, just the fact that Europe and Korea have double the number of players that NA does should be enough to explain any skill gap between the regions, like almost entirely. So anyways, right? So this is a really good point. There's not nearly as many league players in NA as there are in other regions. It's just not as popular in NA as it is in China, Korea, or Europe, so they have to rely on imports because there's not enough talent in the region. Not because players in NA are naturally worse at the game than in other regions. It's just because the game's less popular, so there's less people, right? Then this person said, it's not really about business. NA doesn't even have big viewership. America is just so rich, they are able to pay their players the most. It's that simple. And I pretty much agree with this, but I disagree with the first thing. He just phrased it weird. It is about business, and like he says at the end, it's about business because American consumers are rich enough that the advertisers are able to afford to pay more, even though there's less viewership. So he's right. NA doesn't have big viewership, and America is rich, so they're able to pay their players the most, right? He's right about those three things. But those things contribute to what it means about business. It is about business, and because NA is rich, and the consumers have a lot of money to spend, and the companies are rich and have a lot of money to spend on advertising, it doesn't matter that NA has less viewership than Europe and less players. Because if advertisers think that the market is worth more and that they can extract more out of consumers, get them to spend more money in NA than they can by advertising in EU, then they're going to advertise in NA, and that's going to bring more dollars into NA League of Legends compared to Europe, and so NA is going to be able to pay its players more, and that's all about business. So I just don't know why he qualified it at the beginning with it's not about business, because it is. And then I said, so this was the one thing I dropped. No, it's because even with less viewership, companies that advertise/sponsor are willing to pay more for the NA audience because people have a lot of money to spend on their products, unlike Europe Wars. So I just took a shot at Europe. Actually, yeah, my comment's a little bit dumb because that's basically what he said. And that's what he said. Well, that's what I said. America's rich. But I think the reason why I disagreed is because he said it's not really about business, and obviously it is. But actually, the main point of what he said is fine. Yeah, and then this other person brought in the ping. Even in densely populated cities in NA, you get high ping. I don't know why he thinks that densely populated cities make a difference on ping. Ping is just the distance from the server, more or less. And when the server was originally around in NA, it was in California. And so players on the West Coast had a huge advantage because everyone from Seattle through Washington, Oregon, California had very low ping, 20, and if you were down in California, you maybe even had like 8, like in Korea. But on the East Coast, if you were really far away, like if you were as far away from the server as possible, in Florida, in New York, in Pennsylvania, where a lot of people live, the East Coast was getting like 110, 120, 130 ping. So the game was actually unplayable for those people. A lot of players in Florida back in the day actually used to play on the Latin American server because the ping was much closer. It was the server was much closer and the ping was lower to play on the Latin America server than it was to play on the NA server. So Riot finally decided that they had to move the server to a more centralized location. So they moved it to Chicago, which is a little bit east of the center of America, and that brought the ping up on the West Coast, California, Washington, Seattle, Portland, Oregon, to 60, but around the Chicago area, right, you had much lower ping, like 8, and in states around there, like Michigan, Wisconsin, you get like 20, and out on the East Coast and in Florida, you get about 60. So now everybody's playing on 60 ping, and very few people who happen to live around Chicago get like 8 ping. And so in some ways that's better because the ping is lower so that huge eastern portions of the country are actually able to play the game on the NA server. But the downside is that professional players and the people who cared enough about their ping to live out on the West Coast or whatever, got into the game and were good because they were on the West Coast, actually experienced their ping jump up by 40, which was a huge detriment to those players. And for a lot of professional players, really killed solo queue and NA as an avenue of practicing the game because there's no point in practicing on that high ping when you're going to go and the game's going to feel different. It could be actively working against you to get used to how abilities feel on 60 ping when that weekend you're going to have to go play in the LCS on 8 at the stage. Luckily, right, there's a tournament realm server, which a lot of people don't understand or know about that, but all the professional players get given an account on the tournament realm server, and the teams can scrim each other on the tournament realm server from home. They don't have to be at stage at the LCS to use that server. So they can set up custom games on that server and scrim on 8 ping. So most professional teams, right, do almost all their practice in scrims versus other teams on that 8 ping still. But the problem is that once your set scrims are done for the day, you can't get any extra good practice in solo queue because it doesn't work. Now, then this is a whole nother issue to get into. Interestingly enough, right, Riot came up with the idea for Champions Queue, and they brought that low ping environment back to California by creating Champions Queue server, right, that had low ping like that for the West Coast, and inviting a bunch of top players to it, but not enough players played on it, so that matches became very difficult to find, and so it died. And right now it's currently down in between splits, and that doesn't have to do with anything other than the players in NA not wanting to play the game more. And so they had the opportunity to play and practice on a low ping environment if enough of them would have done it, but not enough of them are doing it right now, and so it's currently not available because it was so impossible to find matches. Okay, so then we got this guy, Europors Lamau. You do know that all the money in America goes to the top 1% and politicians, right? And median income in the US is lower than several European countries. And then he liked his own comment. So I hit him with a book, which is what I'm doing this about. So I mean, honestly, I took a lot of time to think about this, so we can pretty much just read this off, and then we'll get into some of the other league issues that got pointed out on this video and stuff like that. But this one really got me hooked because this is about economics and league. And all I was saying was that America's a very wealthy country, consumers have a lot of money to spend, and that's why companies in the US are willing to spend more on advertising than they are in a place like Europe. We also talked about the language issue with Europe, how they speak many different languages, and so it's hard to advertise to all of Europe unless you're a company that sells in every country in Europe. If you're going to be a German sponsor on a European League of Legends team, only a small percentage of the people that you're reaching are German, so it's not really worth it for you to buy the advertising space. But anyway, so we get into this one, and this is some of the economics. The money in the US does not all go to politicians. Now, to be fair, he said it goes all to politicians in the top 1%, but we'll get into both, don't worry. But not even close. Yes, we have some corrupt, crooked politicians, but I'll just read what I wrote. The money in the US does not all go to politicians. Even our most crooked, wealthy politicians have millions of dollars, while our economy produces $20 trillion a year. Depending on the source, median income in the US is around 5th or 6th in the world, and most of the countries ahead of the US are ahead of the US because they have a very small population of wealthy people, like the United Arab Emirates, a lot of wealthy oil people, Switzerland, a lot of wealthy people storing their money there, living there for tax purposes, and Luxembourg, which is the same thing as Switzerland, and also got to be like the smallest population of a country in Europe. So it's easier to have a higher average income or median income in a country like that. My point is still that advertisers are willing to pay more for access to the US market because US consumers have more money to spend. Another factor is that the European market is split into many different languages, which has always made LEC advertising and sponsorship difficult. You are correct that most of the wealth that is created in the US goes to the top 1%. However, this does not necessarily make the lives of the other 99% of people worse. The top 1% have their wealth invested in companies which increase production and create jobs. This growth increases the standard of living for everyone. Instead of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, it's more like everyone gets richer and the rich get extremely rich for having made it to the top of a meritocratic system and taken the risk of investing their life savings into companies that make everyone's lives better off. The reason why we don't feel this right now is because we're suffering from massive inflation and reeling from a ridiculous shutdown. The government decided to shut down the country for years because of a virus which has only killed 6,000 18 to 29-year-olds. During this man-made recession, the government quadrupled the M1 money supply, and this terrible government policy is the cause of your troubles, not the top 1%. So that's basically it. I don't know really why he brought income inequality into this, but basically, as someone who is defending Europe, but I mean his name is Vietnamese, so I don't know why he's defending Europe, but as someone who's defending Europe and making fun of the US, he wants to point out that there's massive income inequality in the US, but there's massive income inequality everywhere, including in Europe. And income inequality can be bad, but it doesn't necessarily have to be bad. You have to explain why it's bad. If people just say there is income inequality, and so it's unfair that 1% of people have so much money, and they don't explain why that is actually bad, then they're lying to you, right? Because you can have somebody, like an economy with 100 people, and the person at the top of that economy could make $1 million a year, and everybody else in the economy could make even $100 a year. But if the next year, right, with the way that that economy works, everybody else, right, makes $200 a year from $100 a year, and the guy at the top goes from making $1 million a year to making $10 million a year, is it completely unfair and bad that the way that is that system bad? Is a system that takes that guy from making $1 million a year to making $10 million a year, or who owns $1 million in wealth and now has $10 million in wealth, is that system bad because he gained more money faster than everybody else, even though he already had enough money to begin with? Or is it good because everyone's income rose and so everyone's standard of living rose? The reality of the situation is that you don't want to throw away a system that makes everyone's lives better off just because you think that it's unfair that some people have more than other people. And it's important to note that while there should be some limitations to how much more some people can have than other people, and it's important that the system does actually promote other people's lives getting better. That's really important, because right now, and we kind of got into that at the end of my comment, people's lives aren't getting better, right? And so they don't feel that this system is working anymore. That's why people without a fundamental understanding of the issues jump to saying that the reason why things are bad is because there's this unfairness in the amount of money that's in the way that the money is being distributed. But it's not the uneven distribution of money that's causing things to be bad. You can have a system with uneven distribution of money where everyone's lives get better, and that's capitalism. And it's only fair that there's an uneven distribution of money because some people are smarter and work harder than other people, and some people take more risk than other people and are smarter and harder working than other people. Now, if people inherit money and they don't do anything, they don't take any risk to get the money, they don't have to have any intelligence or any hard work to get the money, I think that is a problem for the system, because it creates this never-ending generational wealth where people don't ever have to work or produce anything. And that's the opposite, right? Because what we want is wealthy people who contribute to society and making everyone's lives better, not wealthy people who just inherit their money and don't have to do anything ever. And so it's important that on certain issues, right, like on capital gains tax, or on capital gains tax and specifically actually on the estate tax, I think that the estate tax should be raised. So I bet on a lot of policy issues, this guy and I would actually agree, but we don't get there for the same reasons. And maybe on some important ones we would disagree. If people inherit money and they didn't do anything, didn't contribute anything to get the money, it's important that the government steps in and takes some of that money so that people aren't able to live for 1,000 generations without ever working. That kind of aristocracy is not good for a country. And that's actually unfair. But somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, who was not worth a lot of money and worked really hard and was really smart and took a lot of risk and always had all of their money on the line, right, created thousands of jobs and expanded our production. And if you expand production per person, you're going to increase the standard of living for people. If you increase GDP per capita or production per person, you're going to increase the standard of living for people. So those people who have contributed to increasing the standard of living for everyone, who are worth $1 trillion or who are worth $500 billion, those people are not bad people. And those people aren't making people's lives worse. In a lot of cases, they're making people's lives very much better. It's right now, we're at the most dangerous point that we could be at as a country, because people think that the reason why their lives suck is because of the top 1%. It's because of those wealthy people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and those people are evil, and we need to take their money and stop them from doing everything that they're doing. But a lot of what they're doing is benefiting our society. And so it's dangerous, because if we just attack those people, what we're going to end up doing is destroying the system that has made people's lives better over time in the first place. The reason why we don't feel like our lives are getting better over time right now is because they're not, because of some bad government policies like that have shipped our jobs overseas, our free trade policy, our immigration policy, which has brought more people in. And so again, if you increase your production per person, the standard of living will get better. If you bring in more people and don't increase production by a ton, then people's standard of living will get worse. So we have a lot of problems. Inflation is another problem. The government created an unseemly amount of money during the COVID pandemic. And they didn't even need to do that, because the recession that we were in, that they tried to create money to get us out of, was a man-made recession that we didn't even have to go into. If we had just left the country open and let people work, people would have not been unemployed, people would have been able to work and to keep paying their bills. The government wouldn't have had to create so much money to try to get us out of the mess that we were in, to try to sustain us through that temporary shutdown. And then we wouldn't have the inflation we're having today. And we're on the brink of another recession because we're at full employment and production just receded 1% in the first quarter of 2022. And if it recedes again in a month or two here, when we get the second quarter GDP number for 2022, we'll technically be in a recession again. So that is going to hurt people and make their lives difficult. And at the same time as we're in this recession that we're about to enter, we have massive inflation. And the way that the government gets us out of a recession normally, like we talked about during COVID, is they make it easier to create money. They make it easier for the banks to create money, and then the banks create liquidity or loans that go to businesses so that businesses can increase production and start hiring people back, and then it puts the economy on track to recover, and our production starts increasing again. But when we have massive inflation, the Federal Reserve can't afford to lower interest rates. Because if they lower interest rates to try to stimulate the economy and get people hired again once people lose their jobs in this upcoming recession, then it'll create worse inflation. Now, if they raise interest rates to try to stop inflation, then they will make the recession worse and make the unemployment situation worse, because companies trying to grow again and start up again are going to have a harder time getting liquidity or getting money to start new projects, to hire people back up, and to begin expanding again. So not only are we going to be in a recession, but we're going to be in a recession that is difficult to get out of because of the policies that the government has undertaken. It is a complete disaster, complete mismanagement. So those are the things that are hurting people in the middle class in this country, is immigration, free trade policy, the government spending, and the creation of money from the Federal Reserve and from our banks, which the banks can create that money because of the Federal Reserve. So those are the things that are hurting people. And then the politicians who created this mess, who appointed these people to the Federal Reserve, and who implemented the spending policies that put us into this recession and inflation spiral, those people are then coming to the public and saying, it's not our policies that made things worse, it's the rich people. And if you vote for us, we'll take money away from the rich people to make your lives better. But that's not actually going to make anyone's lives better, right? It's just going to increase the power of the government, increase people's reliance on the government in order to survive in this country. And it's not going to address the root cause of the issues that actually made people's lives worse. So the whole thing's quite terrible. Anyways, to get back to NA League of Legends, see what other people said. So to wrap this one up, obviously Riot considers NA a major region. NA has been considered a major region literally forever. The reason why the groups are divided this way is because MSI has always had 3 playing groups like this. It's just the way that it's been since they had a system before, a long time ago, years ago, where all the play-in teams, all the wildcard teams played each other, and then they would play like the bottom 2 regions, I think, bottom 2 major regions in like a best of 5 or something like that, and then the winners from those 2 matches would go into the Rumble stage, and then there'd be like one match between, usually the wildcard teams would lose every time, and so then there would be one match versus, a wildcard team versus another wildcard team, and then that would be the wildcard team that would make it into the event. And then they changed that format because they said something about not getting to practice enough against the major regions. So they made it so that, okay, well, we'll split up the major regions as evenly as we can distribute them, and then put different play-in teams versus them, so that they have a chance to practice against them. And, we'll make it so that there's enough spots for all the major teams to advance, and then, a couple of wildcard teams, 1 or 2 wildcard teams or whatever. And that's just how it is. It doesn't have anything to do with NA being a major region or not. Players, and this goes for people in general, people get paid what they're worth as determined by the market, the supply and demand for that labor. And so there's a certain supply of NA professional players, and it's very small, and it's limited to roles and how good the player is and stuff like that. It's very unique, because really the supply is one, and it's that player for the most part. Players are pretty irreplaceable in between each other, because you're paying for a different package between one player and another player. Very different package in most cases. They're not equivalent. So usually there isn't, you wouldn't even say that in something like this there are, the supply is 2 equal players, because there's not really such a thing as 2 players that are super close to each other. In some cases there are. And then you've got a demand. There's a certain number of teams that need those people for a certain number of slots. And then, if there's only one team willing to pay the one player, then they're not going to get very much money. If there's 5 teams willing to pay the player, then they'll pay that player a lot of money. And how much money they can actually be willing to pay that player is determined by how much money the team brings in. And that, has a lot to do with advertising and sponsorships. And in some regions, like NA, the advertising and sponsorships are high. So NA gets a lot of flack because the region's not as good as other regions, but the players make a ton of money. It's not that teams are necessarily overpaying players, or that, the NA players don't deserve to be paid that because they're a little bit worse than the EU players. It's just the fact that it actually has zero to do with the players whatsoever. It has to do with the fact that the people who are watching teams in NA have more money to spend than, consumers in other regions, because America is a very wealthy country. And the companies here have a lot of money to spend on advertising. And like I said, there's no language barriers, so it's very difficult to advertise in the EU. That's it. And even then, like I just talked about, I'm not even sure that it is true that NA players are just paid more than everybody else. Most of the top paid players are in Korea and China. And, a lot of the top players in Europe make a ton of money. And their perception of how much money NA players make is wrong too, because there are a lot of NA players that still make $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, the bottom NA players. The limit's like $45,000 or something like that. It may have gone up over the last couple of years, but that was the bottom salary in the LCS a few years ago, was like $45,000 a year. So there were definitely bottom tier players on a lot of the bottom tier budget teams that are getting paid like about 100,000 or right under 100,000. So the idea that every NA player is making 6 figures is not correct. At this point, if Vietnam passes the Rumble stage and NA doesn't, Riot should consider swapping Vietnam and NA for major region. So let's get into that. This guy's saying that Vietnam should be a major region instead of NA if Vietnam makes it out of the Rumble stage this year and NA doesn't. So let's look at the history real quick of how NA has done at MSI and how Vietnam has done at MSI. And we'd even put Worlds on the side for a second, because obviously NA has done a lot better at Worlds than Vietnam has. But, just looking at MSI, right? Vietnam has one team, the Saigon Buffalo, who won every single match against Japan and Latin America. And then they lost both their games versus Korea. So that's a pretty good showing. They're obviously, no one expects them to be good enough to be the best team at the tournament. And so they didn't. But they did take their 4 matches against the wildcard teams cleanly. In the same way, NA won all 4 matches against their wildcard team, and they lost all 4 matches against G2. So they're doing about the same. So you could definitely say that with this very small sample size of a few games on each team, we're talking about 4 games here versus wildcard teams from Vietnam, and 4 games from NA versus 1 wildcard team. So with this small sample size, you could definitely say that NA and Vietnam so far at this MSI are performing about the same. But again, there's not really much room for them to perform any differently here, is there? Vietnam was never going to beat the Korean team, and it's good that they didn't lose any games to Japan or Latin America. NA probably wouldn't have lost any games to Japan or Latin America, and probably wouldn't have won any games versus the Korean team. So if you switched NA and Vietnam, they probably would have done exactly the same, but that doesn't mean that they're exactly equivalent to each other, because they haven't played each other yet. So then we've got to see the Rumble stage. So then he's saying, well, if they beat them in the Rumble stage, blah, 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 then they're better. And that's true. So then we have to go back to past seasons to get an idea, because we've got such a small sample size and this MSI hasn't happened yet. So what about like the 2021 MSI? So for the 2021 MSI, I wanted to see what happened, because I haven't really been following in a while. I was someone who watched old school LCS, followed like the World Championship over the last couple of years. I know CLG won an MSI at one point. I know Team Liquid came in second place at an MSI a couple of years ago. So we'll get into that, obviously. But I haven't really been following, so maybe the last couple of years Vietnam has been dominating MSI and NA's been doing really bad. So let's take a look. In 2021, at the having a hard time seeing what's going on. So actually, in this last MSI, and I think this person's confused about this, in this last MSI, Vietnam's team was unable to participate in the tournament, which is unfortunate because we'd like to know who was better and if they did well or what. But PCS, PSG Talon, was able to participate, and PCS, if I remember correctly, should be Southeast Asia. Yeah, it's Taiwan, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia. So pretty similar to Vietnam. At one point, Vietnam and PCS were one region together, which was like Garena or something like that. So Vietnam was in the Southeast Asia category until they became their own region, because Vietnam's scene really took off. But so we could take a look at that. So I get that this person's kind of considering PCS as a proxy for Vietnam, but Vietnam didn't play at this MSI. PCS did well, and NA underperformed, and NA ended up getting knocked out. They qualified, obviously, through the wildcard teams. I'd like to be able to see the record, like what actually happened. So were these the original groups? And Cloud9 went 4-2. I guess we don't know exactly who they lost to. Oh, yeah, I think we can see here. So I think Cloud9 2-0'd. I'm having a hard time reading this. I think Cloud9 2-0'd Latin America. They went 1-1 versus the Korean team. and they went 1-1 versus Japan, if I'm reading that correctly. So, that's. I was gonna say the record 4-2. It seems like they lost. They lost both their games to Korea, and then they won all their games versus the wild card teams. They did lose a game to a wild card team, to be fair, and they lost to Japan, but they also beat the Korean team, which went on to get second place. So, obviously not that bad. They qualified to the group stage, and then they ended up getting knocked out of the group stage, not making top 4. So they got 5th place at MSI, behind China, Korea, Europe, and unfortunately the team from the PCS, which is a wildcard team from Southeast Asia. Although, keep in mind that while technically nowadays PCS is considered a wildcard region, PCS is not a wildcard region, and actually never has been. Taiwan, right, Hong Kong, Garena has always been considered a major region. Going back to the beginning of Worlds, the first Worlds was pretty much just NA and EU, but second Worlds and onwards, there were really, and in my mind this was always the case, there were 5 major regions, which were China, Korea, NA, EU, and Southeast Asia. Those were always the 5 major regions, and the reason why we know that those were the 5 major regions is because in all of the older World Championships, Southeast Asia always had 2 teams directly qualify to the World Championship into the group stage of the World Championship, whereas the wildcard teams had to play into the World Championship. So NA had one bad year at MSI where they were the worst major region. If you want to consider PCS a minor region, then technically they're a minor region. And Europe, Europe ended up, well, who do they play? That kind of makes a difference. Europe also lost in this round, and so technically Europe finished at the same place as them. I guess we'd like to be able to see who finished higher, Europe or PSG Talons. They finished in the same place, so it would have been nice to know who's the definitive third team. Is it Europe or is it PSG Talon? And it probably would have been Europe, to be fair, but hard to say because they don't play that third place out. So NA did have this one bad year at Worlds, and then in 2020 there was no MSI because of COVID, and then in 2019 Team Liquid took second place at MSI, and Europe got first, followed by Korea and China, which tied for third and fourth place, and then again the team from Southeast Asia, the Flash Wolves, and now you're thinking back, now Flash Wolves and AHQ, the teams from Southeast Asia, and before that the Taipei Assassins, who won a world championship. This is not Hong Kong, Taiwan are not minor regions. Okay, PCS or Southeast Asia has always been a region that had teams directly qualify into MSI, directly qualify into Worlds, and it's only recently that I think, because Vietnam has been split from Southeast Asia, it's split into 2 regions. It's split into the PCS and Vietnam, and both of those regions are considered wildcard regions, even though they were once a major region when when those pool of players was together. And it's no wonder that because these 2 minor regions or wildcard regions came from a major region, that's why they're the best wildcard regions that there are. And so, Flash Wolves and Phong Vu Buffalo, which is Vietnamese. So back in 2019, it was the same thing. You have your 5 major regions, Europe, NA, China, Korea, followed by Southeast Asia, and then Vietnam. And I would say that's just always the way that it's been. There's not really anything that's changed about that. And then in 2018, you had RNG, so the Chinese team got first, the Korean team got second, European team got third, tied with Flash Wolves from Southeast Asia for third. Team Liquid from NA got 5th, followed by EVOS, which, where are they from? Vietnam, right? So it's just been this way since 2018, right? It's just always been the case that there have been 5 major regions in League of Legends, and they have always been NA, EU, China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia recently split up into 2 regions, and so now they're considered wildcard regions, and they dominate the wildcard teams. That's just the way that it's been. Has NA underperformed Vietnam in a way that warrants Vietnam being moved up to a major region and NA being demoted to a wildcard region? Not even close. NA finished ahead of Vietnam in 2018 MSI. In 2019 MSI, NA got 2nd. Vietnam's never even come close to taking 2nd. I think the highest Vietnam has ever finished, Vietnam has never even made it to the knockout stage. They haven't even made it out of the Rumble stage. The only team that ever made it out of the knockout stage, or out of the Rumble stage into the knockout stage, has actually been the Southeast Asian team, which was either the Flash Wolves back in the day, or HQ, these top tier Southeast Asian teams, not Vietnam, or PSG Talon in that 1 year NA did bad in 2021, and even then, so if anything, you should argue that Southeast Asia should still be a major region, and Vietnam is pretty clearly a dominant wildcard team, but they haven't performed better than NA at all. So going back to 2015, TSM, so again, here you have HQ, like we were talking about, from Southeast Asia. So just look at the results. China, Korea, Europe, Southeast Asia, and then some team from Turkey in 6th. In 2016, Korea, NA didn't win an MSI. They got 2nd. The CLG team got 2nd. So NA has been 2nd at MSI twice, and they get to the knockout stage a few times. Vietnam has never been to the knockout stage. I mean, if anything, you could maybe make the argument that Southeast Asia should be a major region again. But even then, they could be a major region and NA could be a major region. There's no reason to artificially lower NA to a wildcard team when they consistently outperform all the wildcard teams, And I get it. A lot of people say that as a joke, but some of these people aren't joking. This person says, at this point, if Vietnam passes the Rumble stage and NA doesn't, Riot should consider swapping Vietnam and NA for major region. PCS, VCS, and NA LCS is the same level. But that's not true. I mean, we've just been through it. Even if we go back and look at how, Southeast Asia has performed. So going back, NA got a 5th place finish, a 2nd place finish, a 5th place finish, a 5th place finish, a 2nd place finish, a 5th place finish, and now we're at this year. So NA has always either finished in 5th or finished in 2nd. So they finished 2nd twice, and they finished in 5th every other time. So how has Southeast Asia done? Well, they finished in 3rd to 4th, 3rd to 4th, 3rd to 4th, 3rd to 4th, pretty consistent, but this was 2016 to 2015 to 2018, so this was a long time ago. This was before they split. 5th place, no MSI, and third to fourth. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I would say that Southeast Asia is comparable to NA. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that NA having gotten second 2 times makes NA much better than Southeast Asia, but I'm not going to make that. I'm not even going to make the argument. It's hard to compare their records when they're so different. Frankly, the fact that Southeast Asia, regardless of Vietnam splitting off from the region, regardless of their classification as a major region or a minor region, having to qualify in past the wildcard teams or having been slotted in automatically like back in the day, Southeast Asia has consistently performed about third or fourth place almost every single time, and I think one time they got fifth place. They deserve to be a major region for sure, like they were back in the day when they were automatically seeded into Worlds. However, NA has also every single time consistently performed above every single other wildcard region. Because again, Southeast Asia shouldn't be a wildcard region, and it never was. And NA has performed and finished above all of these regions, and so they've always gotten fifth or second place. And when they got second place, right, that's something that even Southeast Asia has not done. Then you look at Vietnam, and well, Vietnam's, you know, definitely right there behind NA and Southeast Asia. Vietnam has never made it out of the Rumble stage at all. So while they're consistently outperforming wildcard teams as well, you could never give Vietnam the same status as NA until they make it out of the Rumble stage. And even then, that wouldn't be enough, because NA has gotten second place at 2 different MSIs. And so Vietnam would have to perform like that in order to get on the same level as NA. So it's just disingenuous, you know? Riot does not consider NA a major region due the lack of success. They are not considered one, and haven't been one since years now. That's not true. They're literally slotted in to MSI every year, as every other major region is. Not to mention the fact, of course, that when you go into the major regions, Southeast Asia won a world championship in Season 2. We mentioned the Taipei Assassins. Now, it was back in Season 2, don't get me wrong, but it was over a Korean team, Azubu Frost at the time. They did well. Southeast Asia, a team who's won a world championship and consistently places, like 4th at MSI, does not deserve to be a wildcard region. That doesn't mean that NA is a wildcard region, though, because NA's gotten second place at 2 MSIs and consistently outperformed every other wildcard region. It's not even close. I think they barely ever lost a game to a wildcard region. They've probably lost like a handful of games. You know, I can remember TSM versus Gigabyte Marines. I think TSM dropped 2 games to Gigabyte Marines. Looks like Cloud9 did lose that 1 game to Japan like 2 years ago or something like that. So those are the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. So there's a handful of times when NA ever even lost a single game to wildcard regions, and they consistently outplace them. Hold on, here we go. Same thing. Honestly, if EG isn't able to make it out of the Rumble stage this year, then I honestly agree that NA shouldn't be a major region anymore. Same idea. This person says it never was. I don't understand how you can have a region that beats teams from China and Korea and gets second place at 2 different MSIs, and then say that that region is a minor region. It's so ridiculous. Dude's saying it like it is. NA has always been about the money, not the competition, so it's not a major region. This is ridiculous. You think that the players in NA don't care about the competition? Of course the professional players in NA who have devoted their entire lives to this game care about the competition. Just because they make more money because of the factors we talked about earlier, because of the business that's involved in the advertising in the market that NA has way more to do with the viewers than it has to do with the professional players. It's not just about money. For the players, it's all about competition. It's ridiculous. It's crazy to imagine where PCS and VCS would be with all the NALCS money. So let's think about that. If PCS and VCS had NA money and could do things, for example, like import players, where would they be? Well, I mean, he's kind of right. If those regions had more money, they might be able to import some players from Europe, and maybe that would work. There are some problems, of course, because the European players aren't going to be able to communicate with those players, so it's not really possible. They could get some Asian players to go over there. They wouldn't be able to communicate well either, though. Taiwan could get some Chinese players. I don't know how the Chinese players would feel about that. That would be really interesting. And then they'd be able to communicate. Only people from NA consider them a major region. The rest of us see them closer to a minor / wildcard region at best. Yeah, I don't know what world we're living in where at best this wildcard region is finishing above your guys' regions and getting second place in 2 MSIs out of there's been 5, 6 MSIs now. NA isn't a major region. They place mostly or even slightly above wildcard teams. How can you call that a major region? It's been said, I have said for years that it's ridiculous that NA is considered a major region with all the world's spots that entails. NA has overinflated funding, and other minor regions need the exposure from being able to send more teams, way more, and NA fails to perform every single year, and it's getting worse. Just like performing the best internationally gives a region more spots, failing to perform should reduce your spots given. Except MSI has always only ever given 1 spot to each region to the top team. As far as worlds go, has NA underperformed the minor regions at worlds? No. NA hasn't done as well as the other major regions, but NA has done fine in some cases at worlds. If you look at Cloud9, they made it out of groups, I think, every year except 1 year. Even TSM made it out of groups multiple times at worlds over the years. So I'm not going to go through, we don't have to go through and examine the whole history of NA at worlds. But NA made it out of groups and then lost to Samsung. I forget whether they lost to Samsung White or Samsung Blue in 2015. Like I said, Cloud9 made it out every single time except for maybe 1 year. And I mean, Cloud9 at one point in the recent history of the LCS or of Worlds made it. They were playing against WE in the quarterfinals. And they lost 2-3 to WE from China. So they were 1 game away in that series from going to the semifinals. They consistently, for the most part, beat the wildcard teams in groups over and over again. So it's not even close. The other thing is, there's actually, and this is something to be said, your region, if it's a major region, has to have depth in order to do decently at Worlds. You think about it, these, Vietnam or PCS are sending one team to Worlds and one team to MSI. Whereas at Worlds, NA has to send 3 teams, and all 3 teams get criticized. So even the third best team from NA has to perform better than the first best team from Vietnam or the first best team from Southeast Asia. Otherwise, people think that NA doesn't deserve to be where they are. But NA could have 2 teams that are going to Worlds every year, or 1 team that's far better than the best team from Vietnam or from Southeast Asia. And NA is still going to get criticized because there's not enough depth in the rosters. So, I mean, we're going through the same stuff. So, I mean, that's pretty much I would say that's the end of that. It's a lot of the same comments, and we've kind of gone through NA's record at MSI. It's pretty straightforward. Vietnam has not proven themselves on an international stage whatsoever. The best performance that Vietnam has had is consistently making it into the Rumble stage. Vietnam has yet to even qualify out of the Rumble stage at MSI. NA has made it to second place at MSI twice. And then you have Southeast Asia, who they perform more consistently than NA does. And so they consistently usually get 3rd to 4th place. They can pretty consistently make it to the playoff stage, make it to the knockout stage, and then lose in the first round. And then one time they got 5th, right, and didn't make it to the knockout stage. While they're performing consistently, though, they have not done what NA has done and gotten 2nd place twice. And there is a big difference between getting 2nd place twice and consistently getting 4th, So NA is either 5th or they're 2nd, is just how the tournament results have been. And so it's kind of awkward to analyze, which is why I said, Southeast Asia deserves to be a major region like they always have been. I think that I'm not exactly sure how these group draws work for like the 2022 MSI, but I would say that you have to make sure, like, PCS should be guaranteed to not be in the position that Oceania was in. Why is it all scuffed? They have to be guaranteed that, because they should be... Why does it look so weird? Can I see the thing with the teams? See this? Like, they need to be guaranteed into, one of these groups. Probably same thing with Vietnam, to be honest, but it shouldn't be random. It should be structured, especially for Southeast Asia, so that Southeast Asia is in a group where, because you can imagine a worst case scenario where Vietnam and Southeast Asia are in a group together with a major region, and then one of them is guaranteed to not get out, even though if they were in separate groups, both of them should probably get out. And I think that that's unfair, and because they've proven that they're good, they should get that. And mostly I'm talking about Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia has won a world championship. They've made it out of groups at Worlds in the past. at MSI, they consistently perform about third or fourth place, and in a lot of ways that's more consistent and better than NA, and that's good. But people are confusing Vietnam with Southeast Asia, I think, because they used to be kind of combined, right? But Vietnam really, if we look at their record at MSI, right, has never made it out of the Rumble stage. They didn't even play at an MSI, whereas Southeast Asia has consistently finished third and fourth place, always making it out of the Rumble stage, except for once when they got fifth. And NA has gotten second at 2 different MSIs, and then all the other ones, they didn't make it out of the Rumble stage. They finished in 5th to 6th in the Rumble stage. So Vietnam has a lot of proving itself to do before it overtakes NA. Really, what would it take for Vietnam? Even if they made it out of the Rumble stage past NA, which would be quite an accomplishment, that wouldn't be enough in my mind for them to replace NA as a wild or as a major region, because that would mean that NA's record has been the 2 second place finishes, and then they've got another 5th place, 6th place finish knocked out in the Rumble stage to add to their record. And Vietnam would have 1 3rd to 4th place finish, assuming they don't make it further than that, and then the rest of the time they're 5th or 6th. And obviously, if you just compare those directly, every time Vietnam is 5th or 6th, except one time they made it 3rd or 4th, and NA is 5th or 6th, except for 2 times they made it 2nd. So Vietnam would just be behind NA. However, there should be a bit of a recency bias to this all, because we want the teams that are currently the best to get we want the tournament slotted in a way so that the teams that are the best get to play against each other, and so that regions that are really good don't unluckily get knocked out of the play-ins or something. So what I would say is that if Vietnam managed to make it to the finals, even though NA has gotten second twice, if Vietnam manages to get second once, because it's more recent, I would say that would be enough to put them on the same level as NA. I would concede that, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's a really high bar, and the reality is that it would probably take a couple of years for Vietnam to consistently perform and make it out of the Rumble stage like Southeast Asia has in order to be on the same level as NA. So I think that pretty much sums it up. Thank you guys for watching, and don't let people bully NA, because let me tell you something. NA is a region with way less players playing on really shitty server with high ping, and even despite those things, consistently outperforms every other every wildcard team and Vietnam, right, which is a wildcard team. Outperform. People who are legitimately saying, before Vietnam have any accolades at MSI, people saying that Vietnam should replace NA, I think are confused. They must be confusing Southeast Asia, I think, with Vietnam. Should Southeast Asia be on the same level as NA? They always have been. They always have been. They won a world championship, which is better at Worlds than NA has ever done. But NA has bested Southeast Asia at MSI because MSI, NA has gotten 2 second place finishes, and Southeast Asia has yet to make it to an MSI final. However, Southeast Asia has consistently made it out of groups and gotten 3rd and 4th place, with the exception of 1 5th place appearance, whereas NA got those 2 second place finishes, but every other time they haven't made it out of the Rumble stage, and so they've been 5th place. So they're hard records to compare, probably about even when you take into account the win from the Taipei Assassins back in the day. Of course, that's important to Southeast Asia as a region, pretty huge, and But it was a long time ago. It was an easier world championship, but you know, NA could have done it then just as well. So you know, but they've always been slotted into Worlds as a major region. So I think there's a little bit of confusion there. Hopefully this clears it up, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.